what's happened over the years is Disney and other production companies have pulled back on some of the elements that might make children uncomfortable, even though those elements might be good for the kid to see because it teaches them a lesson. And they've slipped in other elements that actually aren't good for children. So they're shielding kids from reality. And then they're also putting these very perverse realities in front of them that the kid does not need to see at all. It's completely backwards. They're shielding them from things they shouldn't see and then showing them things that they also shouldn't see. It's a very strange dynamic.
I wonder how much of it has to do with what the animators and the storytellers of today grew up with, which is the thing I talk about a lot of the times is like the reason I believe stories suffer today is that the artists in old Hollywood got their stories by reading and the artists of today get their stories by watching.
Yeah.
So they don't have, they're seeing a curated, cut down version of a final product, whereas the stories that were adapted, Olivia was telling me like how much she loved Mulan. And the reason that resonates so much is because it was adapted from something that was a full story and then is pared down in post-production, and it gets its flair elements by getting Eddie Murphy when the rest of the cast is, of course, traditionally Chinese, and all of that stuff is done in post. But now people come from the curated entertainment and they're trying to make facsimiles of that don't line up because there's none of the soul that came from the original story.
Yeah, I mean, we went certain directions in the film and the making of that movie, especially, that were choices being made on the spot creatively, not really influenced by the world around us, honestly. Just we were so entrenched in the story. Oh, what if we brought in Eddie Murphy and he's now this funny, character that basically is trying to help her, but also gets her into more trouble than that. And that just, but it was story-based, right? That would be great. Then she could work off of that, and she has to be the one to fix the problem, not, this dragon that's sent to help her. And so that, it's plot driven. So, but I do agree with you that, I think, you guys don't remember this, but I was in film and making films when MTV came out. And there was a generation of us, I guess you could say, in those days that were affected by that because we started pacing things faster. And that's kind of another version of what you're talking about is being affected by how the culture is changing and things like that. The MTV made everything, the cuts faster.
Even the news being what it is today and whatever is being as politically correct as it was, you would have had a lot of information coming out. If you were to cast Eddie Murphy now in that role or cast somebody equivalent to that now, there would be questions about whether it was politically correct to do so. And that would make it back to the executives before they even had a chance to run it through any type of focus group or anything like that. Because theoretically, the focus group could give you a great response, and that will kind of curb their fear of going a different direction. But back then, you would have been able to, I'm assuming you were just able to sit down, work, and whatever came through.
Well, definitely more so, but you'd be surprised. I think we were right on the cusp of that, because I do know that it was a big discussion about, well, wait, we got to try and do this with Chinese actors first. And by the way, it wasn't just Eddie. There were a couple other non-Chinese actors that were replaced or, brought in to replace other Chinese actors. And it was because we weren't getting the humor. A lot of those actors had been cast in very serious films. If you go back, especially in the 80s or even a little bit before that, there weren't great roles for Chinese actors, and they certainly hadn't really gotten into comedy, right? And so it was that time where they were having a real struggle. They were very much serious actors coming in and doing these voices. And so, Yao and Ling and Chin Po, Yao was replaced with Harvey Fierstein. And so he took the spot of the actor that was already there. And same with Grandmother Fa, the grandmother in the movie. It was a Chinese actress, but then it became, what's her name? That's the really famous voice actor, like in the Mel Blanc. Shoot, I almost had it. I should know this, but anyway, very famous older.
How has Cal Arts style changed in the last 10 to 15 years?
It's so funny because when I went to Cal Arts, we didn't have a Cal Arts style. I mean, If anything, it was weird. When I went, there was an anti-Disney kind of a thing going on. It wasn't politically based at all. It was artistically based because everybody thought that Don Bluth Company was really cool. Like,
And to be fair, it was.
and they were. I mean, like,
very talented.
So Don Bluth traditionally, this is a little bit of the quick story. He was a Disney animator for many years, kind of rising up in the ranks, had become a director at Disney, and he broke away. He thought Disney was going, if this sounds familiar, he thought Disney was going in the wrong direction. But he's talking about more creatively and story-wise, right? Again, it wasn't political back then. And so he broke off and took about 20 people with him. And this is back when Disney animation was a lot smaller. So like they felt that. There were maybe 60 people and he took 20 of them or something. It's almost that kind of proportion. And they all followed him. And he set up his own shop in a garage and he makes Secret of Nem. If you guys remember the Secret of Nem. And that came out, had a theatrical release, and competed with Disney. And immediately,
which is incredible.
less
That someone could just
consolidation.
start a studio in their garage to compete with Disney. And also, I mean, he's like a legend in terms of his animation abilities. The fact that he was able to rival Disney.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. When you were at CalArts, you mentioned that there was this undercurrent. Maybe ideologically is the wrong word because you said it wasn't political, but of people who were sort of pushing back against Disney or who thought that like the independent projects were cooler. How did that affect Disney?
Well, they were really, because I think they left during The Fox and the Hound was the movie.
Yes, yeah.
And went off to do Secret of Nem. So yeah, they were really hurt by that. And emotionally too. Like these are friends leaving for, I mean, it was that kind of a crazy, it was like a kind of like a family, and this part of your family just leaves. So I know it was like traumatic and all that, but I mean, that's something that, I think anytime you're at sort of the bigger companies, the number one, it's so funny I can tell you this, we all start complaining after a while. And it's kind of sad in a way, but I've seen that happen throughout my years at Disney. We would all sit around at lunch and kind of critique, why are we doing this? And why are we doing that? And you're right, it became cultural stuff too, and political stuff much later, obviously. And some of that I was already gone for, but it was happening in 2000. I left in 2000, and I left for faith reasons because I did not like where Disney was going, even back then. And so it was that. We were starting to kind of get led away from, and a lot of people say, well, Walt wouldn't have done that. We heard that even back when I was there in 1989, and he had been dead for a little while. We were still saying things like, would Walt have done this? Would Walt have done this? And it's crazy how long that lasted, for about 10 years, solid at least. You'd hear that in the hallways, it's like, that's his vision.
Before, because I want to ask you next about you leaving and your faith reasons. I'm really excited to get into that. I think our audience really wants to hear about that. But before we jump into that, while I have this thread to tug at, you mentioned a lot of people being really upset about the direction Disney was taking. And I'm sure some of that was creatively. I'm sure some of that was administratively, like we don't like these working conditions or these hours. One thing that I've heard from people whose businesses have become very successful is that being on the other side of things makes you understand why companies you used to work for did the things that annoyed you. And I'm curious, as you have run your own studio, which has been very successful, and you're doing theatrical releases, how much of what Disney was doing are things where you go, okay, I understand why they did that now, versus how much of it is stuff where you still go, I don't think that was necessary?
Yeah, it's a really good question because, I was a pretty young man at the time. I started at Disney when I was 21.
Wow.
And I got married very early. Well, I don't know why I looked at you. Sorry. I just wanted to see your reaction. But, I was 21, newly married, but but most of the people that had left Disney California or got trained in interns and all this and were setting up the Florida studio were young, because a lot of the old school guys didn't want to leave California. So they staffed this new Florida studio with a lot of young newbies, with just a few masters to sort of train us. And so it was that kind of a feel. And so we're all getting married. We're all having babies together and just becoming a family, honestly, in the Florida studio. And it was a great time to be there. But we also were starting to, question, well, is this even some of the movies that I'm making? Is this something I would show my kids? But I will say that I kind of towed the line for a long time. I was in the Southern Baptist Church at the time. I'd moved from California, where I was at a little tiny Baptist church, First Missionary Baptist, and then I went to Florida and got into a bigger, kind of what became a mega church, honestly, in Orlando, but it was still a Baptist church. And as I was at Disney in those pretty early days, I don't know if you guys remember this, but the Baptist church decided to boycott Disney. And I'm now going to church. What's this?
What year was this?
This was in the, I guess it was late 80s. Okay. Early 90s, probably. And so the Baptist church is boycotting because they felt like, and this is back when also there was a lot of news things coming out of, they're hiding things in the movies to deceive our children. And so a lot of it was crazy. And so I must admit, being on the inside, I was like, oh, this is dumb. And I'm a Christian. I'm a Baptist on top of that. So I'm going to church. I'm hearing how horrible Disney is at church. And then going to work and loving my job and loving and caring about these films because you just get so into it. And so my sister, who was also Baptist, but in Arkansas at a tiny little Baptist church, she would call me and she'd say, a lot of my friends at church are asking, how can your brothers, because we both worked at Disney, how can your brothers be working on those satanic movies at Disney? Shouldn't they leave? And I was like, oh, come on, sis. You need to just tell them, settle down. It's not as bad as you think. And honestly, I do. So this is one thing I would defend is that for many years I was defending the movies. And I would say, okay, well look, Pocahontas, we're making this movie. It hadn't come out yet. We're making this movie. I think some of you guys are not going to like it, but it's all about a real person. And we're just staying true to her story. And Glenn Keane, who had animated and designed Pocahontas at Disney, that animator, Glenn, he was a believer and he stood by that. I'm just being true to this character who's a real person. And part of that culture was that they prayed to Mother Nature. And so they kind of they threw it in there, and she, her belief system is in there, and then they kind of comically show it by her talking to a willow tree, right? Grandmother Willow. And so that's an element of that. And so I'm like, look, it's just, that's part of her culture. We got to be true to that story. And then along comes, other movies, and especially Mulan. Well, now she's praying, the dad at the beginning is praying to his ancestors. Yeah. And she does too. And well, we're like, but look, that's part of their culture, and we're just being true to ancient Chinese culture because that's where this is set. And I'm leading to, and so I would defend it, and she'd go back and she'd tell her, and I don't think they cared. They were like, still, I hate it. I don't want my kids to learn about praying to Mother Nature, and they certainly had a good point too. So I was kind of in the middle and just really kind of like not knowing how to feel about it and really questioning myself for many years while I was there because, well, yeah, we're doing it for these reasons and we're just staying true to these stories and cultures. But then, and I don't have any say in what movies we make, right? Yeah. That's all made up stream, so how do I even address that?
That's in that idea still works when they do it right. There's a reason Moana is successful because it embraces aspects of Polynesian culture that people still, they don't have that same hiccup about it that they probably would have had in the early 2000s. Yeah. But that's when they stay true to an idea like that, as opposed to the things you guys are talking about more, which is like the stuff that's very, very much parents don't want their kids being around.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Culture War podcast. We're live every Friday, 10 a.m. to noon, so subscribe and come hang out.